We've started the recording. Kia ora tātou, I ranga te rama, kui mai korona tēnā koutou tēnā tātou katoa. Nō wera e māti atu te tauhi pokakahi manaki, tēnā koutou tēnā tātou katoa. Welcome everybody to this Regional Transport Committee. I'm obligated to read a Chair's statement regarding public recording, which I will do now. I remind committee members that the public section of this meeting is being recorded and will be made available on the Bay of Plenty Regional Council website following the meeting and archived for a period of 3 years. To those members of the public here today, all care will be taken to maintain your privacy. However, as a visitor in the public gallery, your presence may be recorded. By remaining in the public gallery, it is understood your consent is given if your image is inadvertently broadcast. I also remind all present that local government decision-making affords no protection to councillors. Also, council officers and the public for comments made during meetings that are subsequently challenged in the court of law and determined to be slanderous. In terms of a welcome today, I hope I don't miss anybody out. On Zoom we have Commissioner Selwood, Councillor Granger, John Galbraith, Councillor Von Dadelson, Councillor Thompson, and Her Worship the Mayor of Rotorua. And in terms of apologies, we have Her Worship Mayor Turner from Whakatane, Her Worship Mayor Riestra from the Portuguese, Chairman Leader, who's an ex officio member of this committee, and David Moore from the Portuguese District Council. The reason we have no one here today from Portuguese is we understand they've had a major power outage in the Portuguese. So that's the reason they cannot participate. I will move that we note those apologies. Mayor Webber, you have it a second? It's been seconded. I know that. So all those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. As you know, I have a heart the size of an ox, and I have agreed for Councillor Thwaites to make a presentation in the public forum today. He's agreed to keep it to 5 minutes. There'll be no questions, there'll only be points of clarification, and he has reassured me 1,000 times his forum place will be directly related to transport matters. Councillor Thwaites.
Thank you, Chair. Preston, where do I come up?
Just right, thanks, Nick.
Sit there in the middle. Good afternoon, representatives of the Regional Land Transport Committee. As you know, a lot of you know me, I'm Don Thwaites, Western Bay of Plenty Councillor. In my 3rd term on council, I was Mayor Patterson's alternate to this committee. Jane chaired a number of those meetings, and in my 4th term on council, I represented Western Bay of Plenty, delegated by Mayor Webber, to produce the 2018 version of the document we have in front. What prompted me to address you today is the events of last Friday, when we heard the announcement that there was a change to the major roading announcement that had been made. I believe I'm a member of the Amokara Community Board as well. We had a meeting last night. We have a meeting tonight with landowners about stage 3 development. We're building 5 roundabouts on Proles Road. We're putting underground power. We're putting footpaths down. We are all ready to go. We have another public meeting tomorrow night, and then another public gathering on Saturday. So obviously Friday's decision came as quite a shock. In front of you, I'd shown you an old historic map from 29 years ago, the very first meeting as a youngster I went to in the Bethlehem Hall regarding options for bypassing Bethlehem. From that meeting stemmed the need that obviously a second crossing of the Wairau River would be required in upcoming years, and hence the designation of the Tauranga Northern Link. That's had a lot of ins and outs as we go through. I think I've just about seen everything in my time, those 29 years, including one of Inspector Crow's colleagues knocking on my door one night recently, a few years ago, to say, Don, can you come and help out? We've got a dead horse in the middle of State Highway 2, and obviously one of the NZTA tenanted houses had decided to go farming, but fencing was optional, and a horse unfortunately got hit in the road. Police officer euthanized that horse, but road motors weren't prepared to tow a dead horse off the middle of the road, so I had to take my tractor down and tow it. So like I said, I've seen it all over the years. Currently, right behind me, they are thrusting a 33,000 kV underline all the way from Green underground all the way to the Wakamarama substation. In terms of infrastructure, this is unbelievable that cable has not been put through a duct on the new Wairoa Bridge, and it's not been put in a duct under the Te Puna Stream Bridge. It crosses the path of the Tauranga Northern on 2 places in that journey, so I hope they've put it deep enough to accommodate the future roading. Like I said, I believe Minister Wood has been let down by the information he's received, that a small addition on the map I've shown you, that black line is the Tauranga Northern link. 1.1 kilometres further gets you to Snodgrass Road and eliminates 4 road intersections, and a further 700 metres, and in fact all of the land on that 1.1 is owned by NZTA. 6 state houses are currently being occupied by the tenants. That could be accommodated easily, and like I said, once you get to the Te Puna Stream, there are 6 intersections between where the TNL is proposed to end stage 1 and the Te Puna Stream. Beyond that, those red dots represent each of the peninsulas. There's a road each way, a road to the beach and a road to the hills, being Barrett Road, Plumbers Point Road, the next one being Youngson Road, Omokoroa Road, next one being Airsdales Road. Part of that is captured by the Omokoroa to Waihi project, but with the announcement on Friday, the 2 glaring intersections being at Wakamarama and Omokoroa now disappear into the mist. That could be 10 years. And 3 years ago, that was identified. Omokoroa intersection was number 2 on our priority list. Te Puna to Omokoroa was number 1. Omokoroa to Waihi was number 3. And the Katikati bypass was even number 7, actually. So we had quite a good run then. So I actually retired to get into cycle trails and waters and left it to the mayor to do it. But obviously, something needs to be done, and the recommendation and what you're going to adopt to accommodate what has happened in the last few days. I represent probably 2,000 submitters who aren't here because they thought that was a done deal. They didn't attend your meetings and your submissions because they understood that project was happening. So I have to face up to the Mokoroa community in the next 3 nights. So I just wanted to raise that with you today, and just show you the displeasure of the community I live in. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Thwaites. We share your anger and frustration, be under no illusion, but we're locked into certain processes. But hopefully you stay for the majority of the meeting, because when we endorse the Regional Land Transport Plan coming up as item 7.3, I know some of my colleagues are going to float some suggestions to try and assist you in some form. So thank you. But can I just ask my colleagues, are there any points of clarification? You can't pose questions, but any points of clarification of Councillor Thwaites?
Jane used to threaten me 6 years ago that she used to keep count how many times I said TNL at a meeting. So I'm not sure if she started the count again 6 years ago. But I'll let her off today.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Well, thanks for all. I can take it back to the.
In terms of the meeting today, we now go on to there's no late items being tabled. The order of business is nothing I need to notify you about. Colleagues, are there any declarations of conflicts of interest pertaining to any, welcome there, are there any items of conflict of interest that need to be notified to the Committee? There being none, moving on. The Regional Transport Committee minutes on page 6 in the hard copy. Would someone like to move those with a good memory going back to the 19th of February? Someone move those as a reasonably true and accurate record of that meeting. Deputy Mayor Isles, seconded Councillor Neves. They're open for discussion. Any matters arising?
Yes, I'll think it should be noted.
Mayor Webber, we wish.
Some of us had a degree of displeasure in the interim at the weightings that seem to be plucked out of the air by staff and not supported by any resolution from this committee at all.
Okay, you've made the point. Okay, I'll put them. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against, carried. Moving on to the chairman's report. Ken James and Namuta lead this page 14, everybody, in your hard copy. So this covers the public transport operating model and TY being of the New Zealand Infrastructure Commission's draft 30-year infrastructure strategy and the Ministry of Transport's pathways to zero by 2050, now referred to as Heikina Te Whakupara. Floor is yours, James.
Tēnā koutou katoa.
Hold on,
Thanks
point,
very
hold
much.
I'm more than happy to take it as read and move the recommendations.
I think there's some pretty meaty stuff in here, Your Worship.
You've all read it.
I know you've read it, and I know you could put music to it, but I know it's really, really important, some of these. But taking on board His Worship's comments, I know, I'm pretty sure you can summarise where you possibly can.
Yeah, sure. I think the main issue that will be of particular interest to the committee is the review of the public transport operating model, because that's the framework within which we, as regional council, procure our public transport services. And you'll have seen from the press, particularly in Wellington, there have been some significant issues with driver shortages and strikes, and a lot of industrial action that has led to some serious issues with providing reliable bus services in that part of the world. So within that context, it's really important that the review of the public transport operating model focuses on how to make the bus industry sustainable from an economic point of view for those staff in particular who actually go out every day and put themselves on the front line to drive our buses and get people from A to B. So in terms of this particular review, there's some key objectives, which is around ensuring that competitors have access to public transport markets. So if we are stuck with an operator we think isn't performing, there is actually some possibility that another operator can come in and actually do better. That's a really important objective. We've got to make sure that public transport is attractive to passengers. If it's not attractive to passengers, it won't deliver any of our objectives. As I mentioned earlier, those services are sustainable, and that includes a sustainable workforce, and that public transport reduces environmental and health impacts of land transport. And those are four very, very key objectives. So in summary, the PTON review is aiming to understand barriers to delivery of the zero-emission buses, which has been the subject of discussion at the Public Transport Committee, considering how the drivers' wages and conditions can be protected when councils contract bus services, considering the various roles and relationships within the public transport industry, how those can work better, looking at whether the reasons for exemptions to PTON still actually hold, whether they need to be changed, and how on-demand services will be treated under PTON. So there's some pretty meaty topics in there, and Regional Council are proposing to make a submission on the review to the Ministry of Transport by an extended deadline of the 2nd of July. So we'll make sure that that response is made available so that people can see what we think needs to change to make things better. I wasn't going to go through the other two in particular because although they're very interesting, they are probably of lesser direct relevance at this stage, but I'm happy to try and answer any questions if people have them.
Councillor Lees.
Just one issue about the PTON review. One of the discussions has been the size of buses being a barrier to implementation of zero carbon buses because they're very big and very heavy. Is the PTON review looking at more flexibility in the size of buses as well? And is that something that needs special attention from the Regional Council to submit on?
I think as a general principle, what we would prefer is a contractual framework that gives us flexibility to implement the kinds of services and vehicles that we believe are most appropriate for our network. So I think the short answer is yes, we would be looking to make sure that Piton is not a straitjacket, but it's an enabler, and then we can decide as a region how we best work within that framework.
Mayor Chadwick, before I pass over to you, just a note to you and Commissioner Selwood that we are still in epidemic preparedness notice, and that's in effect until the 21st of June, so that you're both attending by audio visual today, and that you both have the same rights as if you were physically present. So you count towards the quorum, you can vote, and you can move and second anything you like. So that's to you two. So, Your Worship, the floor's yours.
Thank you, and thank you for giving us that overview. An issue of concern that we are becoming increasingly aware of is driver and public safety on buses, and I wondered if that's included in the review.
Through the chair, not specifically, but it is included within the overall issue around drivers' terms and conditions and what makes an attractive career for someone wanting to drive a vehicle. And so I think it is really important that any submission we put together clearly outlines those safety and security issues and makes it clear that we need support through investment in security measures, whether those are CCTV cameras, whether they're staff, whether it's better lighting, whatever it might be, because it's no good saying to drivers, yes, we'll get your pay and conditions right if they're still facing risks out on the network. So I think it's a really important point well made.
Any further questions or comments, colleagues? Being none, there's a recommendation on the bottom of page 14. I'll move it. Seconded Deputy Mayor Isles. I'm sorry, Your Worship.
I think we need to get a comparative analysis of hourly rates and working conditions, picking up on the point which has been made about security, that we are competing over. I know at best the rates paid for bus drivers are about a third of what other drivers are getting paid, which is a pretty good hint where one of your problems is.
James.
Yeah, through the chair, that's a really important point. I've heard stories of bus drivers being tapped up by companies who are going to be providing refuse services. They can offer them greater benefits, terms, conditions, and that sort of thing. So yes, you're absolutely right. There's a competitive market out there, and there is a shortage of skilled drivers. So they're going to go where the money and the terms and conditions are best. So I think that's a really fair point.
Good point. Any further comments, colleagues? It's been moved and seconded. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against carried. Page 22, hard copy, everybody. David, floor's yours.
Thank you. There should be a presentation up on the screen. Okay, so what we'll just, Amanda, if I can, are you in control of this thing? Oh, you can give me the guns. Excellent. So just a brief presentation today, just to pretty much just to update you on how things are progressing on a variety of topics that we've already spoken about, starting with the New Zealand Upgrade Program. Might as well start there today. So as you all know, government announced changes to the NZUp program late last week or early last week. That has had a significant impact on TNL, and the upshot of that is a significant increase in commitment to stage one, which is principally driven by the increase in costs that have accrued over the period of time since the project was first scoped. So we're up to 655 million to complete that project, including contingencies. The design component of the contract, so it's a design and build, has been awarded to Fulton Hogan and HEB as a joint venture, and they've already started the geotech work. So that's the good news. The not so good news is that stage two between Te Puna and Moparoa has been deferred. Only route protection at this stage is going to be progressed. So there is provision in the NZUp program for route protection. And anything beyond that is going to have to go through the NLTP process. What I will say is that with some guidance from Minister Wood, staff are looking at options for the Omokoroa intersection at the moment from a safe network, a safety improvements program point of view. We're going to put a range of options on the table and seek to progress those as a variation through the NLTP in a shorter time if we can do, and obviously with the intention of putting stage 2 into the NLTP going forward.
You want to deal with these one slide at a time?
I probably should. That's probably the only one anybody's going to make any significant comment on. What I'd say is the specimen design that is in place now will continue to be worked on. That is the design we think is the best design. So we're not walking away from that. It's a simple case of deferring funding. If there are questions or comments, catch pie.
It's Worship Mayor Weber.
Just a comment reiterating the previous comments, stage 1 and stage 2, 3 years ago, number 1 and number 2 in our priorities. And I don't know how we got it so wrong to land where we've landed today. But, I want to speak to Mr. Jill, we've already agreed to be friends.
Councillor Lees.
Oh, just a comment that we've had a change in GPS, which has driven what we've seen today as opposed to what we had last time. So that would be my own comment in there.
Agree to disagree.
Glenn Crowder.
Just a quick question, because I know there's a lot of public interest in this issue, which is, for those of us who don't know, what is the situation with land ownership on stage 1 route as opposed to stage 2? Because I know there's a lot of discussion about that, but I'm not sure what the facts are.
I'm just mindful we're in open session too, so.
So the process is partially complete would be the comment I would make at this stage, and so that will now progress. Obviously, once the design component's complete.
Any further questions? Or, sorry, Your Worship. Oh, sorry, Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you, Chair. Hopefully you can hear me okay.
Yes.
Just wanting to understand why this project, and obviously like everyone else, I think around the table, we're obviously disappointed, if not in my case, frustrated that this project has gone down the list of priorities. And I'm trying to get some understanding of why that happened. Why did this particular corridor get degraded relative to the other up programs? And why did it not rank favourably in comparison with, say, a walking and cycling bridge across the Waitemata Harbour?
So I'm not going to attempt to answer that last question. What I can describe as the process, the judgment call was I suppose it was a judgment made by the Minister based on the advice he was given, and Councillor Nees is correct, based on the changes in the GPS. As you'll be aware, the rebaselining that was undertaken of how much the NZ Up New Zealand, the upgrade program was going to cost, indicated significant cost increases across the board. And the Minister was faced with a choice of how much could be afforded, essentially. There was an increase in the total allocation up to 8.8 billion, I think. But that was simply not enough to afford all of the projects that were in the original upgrade program. And the decision was made to cut some completely and some partially, and in our case, partially, at least in respect of stage 1 getting an increase in funding as we requested, stage 2 being deferred with route protection. A number of other projects simply got deferred completely or cancelled completely. I can't give you any more, Commissioner Selwood, in terms of the rationale or the process that was undertaken, because staff weren't privy to that.
Your Worship, Mayor Chadwick, then there's Worship, Mayor Weber.
Yes, I wonder if it's worth noting in the minutes that this committee express our collective regret that a proposed route development deferral has occurred that will have an impact on the effective workings of this committee. Just keep it short like that.
I'm happy to accept that. Are you happy to move, Your Worship?
I move.
Is there a seconder for that?
I'll second.
Commissioner Selwood, it's open for discussion. Any speakers for or against the motion?
It's a note of regret, and I think it's done with the best intention of a committee that works collectively to set the priorities for our region. And we understand the wider impact, and we also understand the political opportunity at any time to change the GPS. But it is unfortunate when we work together and agree our priorities, and they can be changed so quickly around us.
Councillor Neves.
Could you read that recommendation, please?
Yes, I could type it if you like, but I'll read it again. We express that this committee express our collective regret that a proposed route development deferral will impact on the workings of this committee.
Councillor Neves.
Thank you. One thing that I thought might, in earlier conversations, that we might like to do as part of the regional land transport sign-off is consider a letter to the Minister on this matter. But I would support your recommendation, Mayor Chadwick, at this point, and maybe we'll strengthen it with another recommendation later.
I'm open to that.
His Worship Mayor Webber.
Yes, I understand the sentiment. I just want to be careful that we're not going outside of our role. This is NZ up funding. This is not land transport funding.
Yep.
So this was an additional two. I agree with it. It should have been in because it was a high priority last time. It's been a high priority for about 18 years now. I understand the sentiment.
Okay,
I think it's all we can, if I could speak, I think it is all we can do is express our collective regret.
Thank you, Your Worship. So it's been moved, Your Worship, seconded Commissioner Selwood. Those voting are myself, Councillor Neves, Her Worship Mayor Chadwick, Commissioner Selwood, His Worship Mayor Webber, Deputy Mayor Isles, and David Spears, the external member of this committee. So I'll put it all those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Did you wish to abstain?
I might abstain.
Okay, it's noted that David Spears abstained. Okay, moving on. So pray God the next slide's a bit better.
I know it's
Yes.
not on the slide.
Oh, you want it on the slide? Your Worship, go for it.
I wonder if it would be helpful to this committee if we could get the weightings that were used, because I know them, through the analysis of the NZ up funding, so that the committee are aware of where resilience, safety, other things rated in line of where we are going. Might be helpful as a learning exercise, thank you.
Okay. Do you want to make that a formal request from the committee to
Indeed.
Minister
Or through you.
Through me. Come on.
Your department.
Yep.
Okay.
We can take that on board.
Your Worship, she's been formally moved. Councillor Leach, happy to second that? Seconded. Any further discussion for or against the motion? Being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. This is a pretty meaty slide, and as I said in my opening comments, we share your anger and frustration. So any further discussion around changes to the New Zealand upgrade program, slide number 1. Double get a slide, David.
We seem to be stuck on that slide.
Hold on.
Literally and figuratively. Okay, so quick commentary around the NLTP. Probably this is not news to any of you. The bids so we're currently going through the NZLTP program. It's expected that we will get an increase to 21.1 billion. The bids for that money are significantly higher than that, and obviously the fund that is available is higher than what was available in 2018-21. However, given the increased costs, that difference is essentially negligible. Deadline for our LTPs is 30th of June, and the final decisions or final recommendations will go to the board in August, so we should have a final decision out late August, we're hoping. No news there to any of you really. Amanda, do you want to?
Any questions to David about this slide? Being done, moving on, David.
Okay. So just wanted to re-highlight the setting of speed limits rule process. I've spoken to you about this before, but just wanted to raise again that the rule as it currently stands proposes some pretty reasonable changes to the way that speed limits will be set and managed going forward, and particularly proposes some changes to the role of this committee in managing that process. We've talked you through that before. I won't do it again. Consultation meetings with the public and with many of yourselves have already been undertaken, but I just wanted to, I guess, remind you all that that submission period is still open and runs through till 25th of June. So I do encourage you to make your views on the process.
We're going to discuss this in more detail later, so
so Road to Zero. So as part of the Road to Zero program, which is one of the priorities in the GPS in terms of safety, there's been a new Road to Zero logo launched, icon. It's a pretty catchy beast when you see it on people's uniforms and things, so you will start to see a little bit more. But one of the things that goes with that is a series of Road to Zero videos, the idea of targeting people in road management and design, transport planners, people in road safety promotion, trying to shift that focus to while you're doing your work, have a think about what the safety Road to Zero implications of this are. How are we getting to that goal? And given the disastrous weekend we've just had on the road, it's a pretty important subject, this one, for us to get right. So again, I encourage you to have a look at those videos, but you will see them being promoted at various places over the next few months. Safe System in Action. This is part of that process. We've actually produced a series of videos of safe system interventions that are working, the sort of case studies to say, hey, when you're designing these things, when you're thinking about how you're designing your network, here are some things that work. And one of the ideas was to produce these videos that actually show real sites where safe system interventions have been put in place and are having a measurable and material impact. So the first three case studies focus on speed zones at intersections and highlighting the difference that can make. Raised safety platforms, so again, the interaction between people and traffic, and rural roundabouts. So again, on our website, those videos are available, and you will start to see those being promoted again towards the Road to Zero program. And another website related topic. So the Right Car website has been updated. So this is the I gave a presentation recently, and I asked for some stats from the Road to Zero folk about road deaths and what were the major causes to road deaths. And the stats around the number of deaths and probably Inspector Calvin sitting next to me will be able to recite this off the top of his head, but the stats around people dying in cars that are rated 1 and 2 star safety are scary. If you're in an accident and you are in a 1 or 2 star car, it's exponentially more likely that you will die than if you're in a 5 star rated car. So the purpose of the Right Car website is to pick up on that and to give people really, really access to what cars there are available in the marketplace at every price range. So $5,000, $10,000, $25,000, etc., that meet those high levels of safety. So really critical tool, and it's going to be promoted at the field days as a kind of kickoff, which is next week, I think. So again, if you know anyone looking for a car, it's a great place to start. I was stunned at the difference that can be made by just being in a 5-star car versus a 2-star car. The One Network framework, so again, I've talked to you about this before, but just, I guess, highlighting that this is progressing more quickly, perhaps more quickly than we had thought. Initial implementation in 24-27 NLTP. The idea behind this is to change the way we're looking at transport rather than as a series of individual pathways and more into a network of modes of transport. So it really is that multimodal shift to looking at your place as a network of transport options. And again, it's targeted at land use and transport planners specifically to give them some tools. And just an update in terms of the Tauriko for Tomorrow engagement. Obviously, that was carried out in April and May, 6 weeks of engagement. We had 78 of the affected landowners who met directly with the team. 1,000 people turned up. So obviously quite a high level of interest. And at the moment, that feedback has been built into the detailed business case, which is going through to decide what the most appropriate option might be for that piece of transport planning.
Excuse me, Chair, just on that, if I may, any indication, David, at this stage of the level of support for the various options that were presented to the public?
Not off the top of my head, Stephen, but I could get that for you if you want to. The team are working through that.
I'd be very interested to know. Thank you.
David, just pause for one moment. His worship, there we go.
Thanks, Christian. David, having seen what you've got there and trying to future-proof it going out 50 years, has anybody looked at the significant gap from where Mills Reef is, or the rural residential blocks on either side of Cameron Road should be intensified? What impact that's going to have on the long term? Where are those, there's most really more land available to be developed in the rural residential land than there is in the Tauriko West land, but it's not factoring in any of this analysis.
I'm pretty sure it has been, but I will double check that. I'm pretty sure when they've looked at this, they've looked at the whole corridor as, what are the implications for future. The transport planners have had a look at modelling those impacts, but I'll double check that and come back to you. Thank you. Okay. And this is a good news story, just to end. So one of the things that we're increasingly trying to do when we are contracting out large-scale projects with partners is look for options to do more than just create some transport networks, but actually to create growth in the community, create jobs. And this is a really cool example. So Hawaii Wainui to Portiki, safety improvements through the partnership that's there. It's so far resulted in 15 full-time jobs for local people in that civil construction company, which is Splice Construction. And that was one of the things that was promoted through the broader outcomes initiative. So a fairly good push for us to look at more than just what's the best price we can get for a contract, but actually what's the best outcome we can get for a contract. So I just thought I'd finish with this one because I thought this was a pretty damn cool outcome.
David, just pause for one moment. Deputy Mayor Isles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just to add to David's conversation there, it must also be noted the cooperation we had with local hapu and iwi in dealing with some of the cuts that were necessary through that section of road. So that all took place under a relatively tight time frame. So just to acknowledge the hapu and iwi for their close consideration working with
as I understand it, they've enabled some of these jobs to be filled as well, which is
Definitely.
pretty cool.
Councillor Lees.
Thank you. David, you mentioned the constrained funding environment that you're operating under. And I'm aware that Ministry of Transport have been doing some work on alternative funding options and streams. Have you any visibility on where we might hear what that might look like?
The really short answer to that is no, but it is ongoing work. I think there's a recognition, and I may well have talked about this in the last Transport Committee meeting, that we can't continue to rely on NLTP, and there've got to be other funding, ways of looking at funding the networks and the transport network that we have, especially as we move away from a transport network that's focused on cars and roads and into alternative modes of transport. It's ongoing work. I couldn't tell you when.
Any further questions or comments? David, are you happy to move your report be received?
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Seconded to Worship Mayor Chadwick. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. James and Lorraine, come up to the table. Item 7.3, page 29, hard copy, everyone. Endorsement of the 2021-2031 Regional Land Transport Plan. And Rachel too.
I'm better today. It's not noisy.
Give it a test.
So James, how do you want to run this? Do you want questions by slide or bracket or?
What I'd like to do,
you tell us.
if possible, I've split this presentation into 5 parts. So if we could take questions and comments at the end of each part, that would be really helpful.
Fine, go ahead.
So those parts are, firstly, the story so far, how have we got to this point? Then secondly, it's about discussing the prioritised programme of significant activities in particular. Thirdly, some key messages and recommendations from the submissions which were considered at the recent deliberations subcommittee. Fourthly, some key takeaways from the RLTP. So it isn't important to lose sight of what we're actually proposing to put forward into the NLTP process. And then finally, a summary of the next steps. So in terms of the story so far, I think it's really important to remember that we are investing or proposing to invest money to actually change people's lives and make things much better. So the photo on the right was from last week when a number of us went down to work with mobility impaired people to make a video for the new concessionary fares, free fares policy that Regional Council is introducing very shortly. It's a really good reminder that quite often we need to get out of our office and go and see how real people can benefit from the investment we make in the transport system. And that investment is subject to this framework. Worth reminding ourselves that the government policy statement on land transport, which is the top of this slide, essentially sets the context for everything that we're able to do within the regional land transport plan. So the RLTP has to be consistent with the GPS. That is something that is clearly set out in terms of the Land Transport Management Act. And similarly, when we get down to the investment level with the National Land Transport Programme, the NLTP, it needs to take account of the RLTP, but fundamentally Waka Kotahi have to make their own investment decisions. So whatever we put forward in this process then has to go into that national funding discussion. And as David has already made very clear, the challenge we have is the struggle for funds, which has come through a range of factors, but particularly the impacts of COVID-19 on Waka Kotahi's funding that they receive through fuel excise duty in particular, as a result of people actually travelling a lot less. It's ironic that that means that funding potentially for a whole range of non-motor vehicle projects is also less. So we have to be very realistic about the RLTP and what it can achieve and what other sources of funding are going to be necessary as we move forward. So in terms of a timeline, this slide will be music to the ears of anyone who thinks that the RLTP process needs to be reformed, because essentially it shows just how long things can actually take to get to the point today where we have a document in front of us, an investment proposition ready to be adopted. So it all actually started way back in December 2019, and really the first 6 months of 2020 was spent ensuring that the objectives, the targets were all very clear and agreed before we then dived into the second half of the year, which was when the discussions around the potential investment priorities were concluded, ready for the public consultation, which was kicked off through the RTC meeting in February 2021. So this shows just what a long, drawn-out process this has been. I think there should be every opportunity next time around to streamline this process and make it more fit for purpose. And one of the things I'll refer to later is a lessons learned review, just actually looking back at all this process and understanding what we can do better, and also how we can influence the process better for next time. In terms of those objectives, vision and the targets, well, fundamentally our vision is about a transport system. This is a system response. It isn't about individual modes or individual activities, but how does the system perform to provide a sustainable, resilient, efficient and safe multimodal access. And again, it's about meeting the needs of all of our communities and also the regional economy. I think the vision captures very well what it is we want to achieve, and the challenge is how we then turn that vision into reality on the ground so that people can understand and appreciate the benefits of the investment that we are able to make in the process. So we have had a number of objectives and targets. I won't go through these in huge amounts of detail, but essentially we have 3 objectives around healthy and safe people. If we do nothing else, then we must keep our people safe, and we must make the transport system much safer than it currently is. So the key target at the bottom there is a 40% reduction in deaths and serious injuries from 2020 levels by 2030 on the region's road network. And given the current levels of crashes and injuries, that's going to be a significant task to undertake. We also then have the very topical issue of environmental sustainability, in particular greenhouse gas emissions. And so the target currently in the RLTP is to reduce carbon emissions by an absolute minimum of 25% by 2030 from that 2020 base. Even that won't be enough to contribute to New Zealand's nationally determined contributions to the Paris Agreement, which is actually at 30%. So one of the things we will have to do at some point in the not too distant future is review that target and understand how we can actually work towards it in terms of our investment strategy. There's a lot of emphasis as well in the RLTP around improving inclusive access so that communities across the region have access to that reliable transport system. And it's around a range of travel choices to meet their needs. And there's a social, economic, health and cultural. A lot easier said than done, and a lot easier said than done in parts of the region that are relatively urbanised compared with the more rural parts of the region. The target, again, a very ambitious one, is to increase the mode share for public transport and active modes to 20% of all urban trips by 2030. If you see the current levels of mode share for those modes, that's again quite an achievement. In terms of economic prosperity, I think we can all agree that the Bay of Plenty region is massively reliant on the ability to move both people and goods efficiently and reliably. We have a huge asset in the port of Tauranga, and we have a very large economic base that requires reliable and efficient freight movements. So the target there is really around maintaining or improving travel time predictability, particularly for freight movements on the primary freight network, and that's both road and rail. There's also a lot of emphasis around resilience and security. So the objective here is around the transport system being able to actually respond, adapt and recover from the unplanned events and the hazards that are going to be increasingly apparent as we move into the future. So the target there is around trying to reduce the number of hours that sections of the national strategic routes are closed on an annual basis. So you recently have seen the floods down in Canterbury. That kind of scenario could hit anyone, anywhere, including this region, and we need to be ready for it. In terms of the recent timeline, just to finish off this part before we dive into questions, the public consultation on the draft RLTP took place between the 5th of March and the 6th of April this year. And in the next section, we'll go through some more detail around that, as well as the submissions that were received. There were hearings between the 13th and 15th of April for submitters who wished to be heard in person. I think there were 12 of those in total. And most recently, on the 28th of May, the deliberations subcommittee met to consider all of the submissions and recommended changes to the document. And we'll go into the discussions that took place in the subcommittee in more detail in the subsequent parts of this presentation. But now time to pause for any questions or comments.
Questions, colleagues? There being none, next slide.
Okay, so on to part two, which I think there will be some questions and comments upon. So this, I think without doubt, has been the most challenging part of the RLTP process, and the one that has
Sorry,
generated.
just pause, James, his worship there.
Just when you skidded past pretty delicately. When are we expecting as submitters responses? So we know why you decided on, why you landed on the points you landed on?
So through the chair, within the deliberation subcommittee, we produced a report which set out how we have proposed to respond to all of the submissions. So that's already in the material. And the changes have been reflected in the document. That's something we'll come back to in the next part of the presentation. The letters themselves, in terms of actually people being made aware of how their comments have been taken into account, will go out after the adoption of the RLTP. So people won't die wondering, they will have an opportunity to understand how their submissions have been treated.
So in reality, you made up your minds and you let us know afterwards what you thought or what your response was to us. As a significant submitter that is bitterly disappointed at where this has landed, to not get a response prior to this, we have to accept it. I suppose you know where we're going on our ability to actually say yes to anything.
So through the chair, I think it's...
Just pause, James, Namuta.
So through the chair, obviously we've gone, the decision you made back in February, or recall, you appointed a subcommittee to hear and deliberate on the RLTP. And so that subcommittee have made their recommendations back to the panel, and that is the process. But I'll refer to James to see if there's anything further James wants to add.
Well, through the chair, this is something that we are going to come back to throughout the presentation. So there'll be plenty of other opportunities to discuss individual points and to ensure that everyone feels they've had a fair say.
Your Worship, as you know, we wanted you on that hearings panel. You referred to TCC, so we particularly wanted you on there.
Let's not go there because
Well, I think we have to say it because we genuinely wanted you because of the sheer size and height of the Western Bay. I think we wanted you there, but that is, in fairness to Commissioner Selwood, he did look after your interests very well. Keep going, John.
Through the chair, yes, I absolutely agree. Commissioner Selwood did exactly that.
Keep going, James.
Thank you. So this section then essentially sets out some more detail around how we went through the prioritised programme of significant activities. And I think the first thing to recognise is that no process is perfect, and there's certainly an opportunity to learn lessons and do things better next time. So none of us, I think, would be completely happy with everything that went on, but fundamentally, as a result of the process, we still feel we have a robust regional land transport plan and a robust prioritised programme. So in terms of the process, the fundamental issue is that before we even get into a programme, there is a need for both Waka Kotahi through their investment proposal and the local authorities through their 6-year programmes to identify the significant activities they want considered within the prioritisation process. So actually identifying those significant activities actually takes quite a long time, and there are various spreadsheets and information in Transport Investment Online, the Waka Kotahi investment tool, which need to be worked through before we actually even have a long list of things to put into a prioritised process. And then fundamentally, item 2, it's the job of the regional advisory group, that's officers from all of the territorial land authorities, along with Waka Kotahi, to score the various activities against the RLTP objectives. And whilst weightings are important, we have to remember that it's the score allocated to the projects by the RAG that is just as important as the weighting they then place on the prioritisation criteria themselves. You can't have one without the other. And the regional advisory group were in a position to meet and moderate those scores and agree them, comparing those to the evidence available as to the contribution of each of those activities to the various investment objectives. And the final score is then calculated using those prioritised weightings. For the Western Bay and the Transport System Plan in particular, we had the added benefit of being able to understand the interdependencies and scheduling between various projects. And in our view, that significantly strengthened the process because it meant that the list of activities wasn't just a list, but there was actually some understanding of how they all actually fit together. The prioritised list was then essentially subject to what we call the moderation process through the RTC.
James, while you're bringing it up, there was a question from Her Worship. Mayor Chadwick, did you want to pose your question now, or do you want to wait till the end of this presentation?
I'll wait till the end.
Okay, fine.
Okay, so this slide goes into a bit more detail about the process we went through. And I think, again, the first thing to emphasise is that, if we had our time again, we would have probably done things somewhat differently. But this is the process we went through, and it's important to be clear about the decisions that were made at the time. So if we start at the top, the key decision back at the 7th of August RTC meeting was to adopt the RLTP prioritisation method that was developed by the Local Government Transport Special Interest Group, or TSIG. And this prioritisation process is a very, very slim document. And when you actually read through it, the approach is actually summarised in about 3 bullet points. So It certainly can't be accused of being particularly detailed. And the important point to note is that every RTC has used this process. So if there are flaws with it, then there are flaws across all of the RTCs and the RTPs, not just those in the Bay of Plenty. So we can all, I'm sure, agree that next time we like to do things a lot better, and improving this prioritisation process and getting it agreed will certainly be part of that. But nevertheless, we are where we are, and in view of that agreement, we then move forward. So the RAG met on the 12th of November and undertook that moderation of the scores that were submitted by each council. And that produced two things really: a draft prioritised list of significant activities, which was circulated post-meeting, and then there was the opportunity for RAG members to review that before it then went to the RTC 3rd of December workshop. So the RAG was well across what happened, and at that point we were agreed that that was the list that we were going to table. So at the bottom of the slide is the discussion itself at the 3rd of December workshop. So at that meeting there was a request for the RTC to consider and provide guidance on that draft prioritised list of significant activities for inclusion in the RLTP. Now, there's a lot of discussion at that meeting, but the feedback was that there was really not much evidence about how the narrative of the front-end document, which was very much focused on the GPS priorities and particularly a low-carbon transport system, was actually then related to the draft prioritised list of activities. So there appeared to be a mismatch between the two. Now, the big learning point for me at this point is what happened next. So at that meeting, when you read the minutes, there was actually no direction received on any changes to be made to the prioritisation methodology or indeed the criteria weightings. So that meant no direction to do anything different, but also no direction not to do anything different. And I think one thing we should all learn from, and I certainly will, is that when we are going to make significant changes, we need to make sure the members of this committee at least understand what we're going to do before we do it, so that there is then that opportunity to ensure that next time we have that agreement that we will do something different.
Sorry, could I
Just pause, James, his worship.
I find it really hard to retake that last statement. I remember a pretty vigorous discussion around the weightings. Now, I'm sure I wasn't the only person in the room that heard myself, but I raised it afterwards. There is no resolution. So to say there was no discussion, there was significant discussion. I think, let's be correct.
And through the chair, I didn't say that there was not significant discussion. The issue is that there was no resolution at the end of that discussion which provided guidance on what we as staff should do. And I think we can all agree that was something that should have happened.
Just pause, James, the worship Mayor Chadwick.
Yes, thank you. I find that quite an interesting comment too, because I was part of that meeting where we did question hard about the weightings for the criteria setting. And yes, we'll learn from it and we'll watch very carefully, but I worry, did anything change as a result? Did any prioritisation change at all during the process? The criteria weightings didn't change. And did any submitters also have an impact on a change to recommendations? Otherwise, we feel like we're not really having a political impact.
Through the chair, I think that's something we can deal with when we get to the deliberations subcommittee, because that was the point at which there was a lot of discussion about different weighting scenarios. If we're able to come back to that, we can deal with that point there.
You have our assurance, Mayor Chadwick, and the meeting. Keep going, James.
Okay, so moving on to the new year. So the RAG met on the 15th of January and undertook a scoring exercise with revised priority weightings. And again, it was discussed across all of the different councils, and no concerns were raised by officers at that stage about a change of weightings. This was very much an exercise to understand what would happen if there was a change and whether the prioritised list of significant activities would be better aligned to the RLTP front-end document. So after that, we then moved back to the RTC and the workshop on the 19th of February. So this is where the concerns were expressed about changes to criteria weightings. And there was, again, a significant discussion about that revised priority list. So we have to recognise that that was the case, and there were views expressed on both sides about whether that was good or bad. Fundamentally, that led to the afternoon meeting of the RTC where, notwithstanding the comments made at the workshop in the morning, the committee did decide to adopt the draft RLTP and the prioritised list of significant activities for public consultation. So the understanding was that there's another opportunity for submitters to then make their points clear about whether they agreed not only with the RLTP document, but also the prioritised list of significant activities. And so this is the slide that essentially sets out the work that has been done and was completed as part of the deliberations subcommittee process. So essentially what we have here is a table which shows 4 scenarios and different weightings for each of the investment priorities. And each of those scenarios does produce a different list of prioritised activities, and the deliberations subcommittee in the papers were presented with the different lists which showed how the activities changed across the different scenarios.
Okay, James, just pause for a moment, just re-emphasise the fact that it was originally 3 scenarios.
Yes, I certainly can.
And the politicians asked you to come back with one that at least increased weighting for integrated freight and regional resilience. So that's how originally 3 became 4.
That's right. So there were going to be 3 scenarios. So scenario 1 was the prioritised list that went out to public consultation as part of the draft RLTP with the weightings that you see there. So the major emphasis being on climate change, safety, and better travel options in particular. Scenario 2 was the previous set of weightings, which essentially had a much higher weighting for the integrated freight and regional resilience priority versus the better travel options priority. That was the main difference between those 2, although climate change was emphasised slightly higher in scenario 1. Scenario 3 just simply said, well, how we just give them all the same priority weighting, so 25 across the board. And as you rightly say, Mr. Chair, scenario 4 was added at the request of the deliberations subcommittee as an additional sensitivity test to look at a slightly higher weighting compared to scenario 1 for integrated freight and regional resilience. Now, at this point, the eagle-eyed amongst you in your information pack may notice that under scenario 4 in the report, the percentages are actually incorrect between those 2, but they're correct on the screen, which is the important point. So essentially, that was the process we went through. So as I mentioned before, the deliberations subcommittee then had the opportunity to consider and discuss the results of those 4 scenarios. We went through a number of discussions around the placement of individual projects within those.
On page 38, it clearly spells out, because the division was called, as to how the vote was taken. So
Yeah.
the scenario for 4 was defeated by the majority, and the majority went for scenario 1.
So just before we pause for any more questions, I think it's worth emphasising the key reasons as to why scenario 1 was ultimately endorsed by the deliberation subcommittee, recognising there was a very strong and vigorous debate, and not all members of the subcommittee agreed with this recommendation. In essence, reading through the submissions, we felt that there was broad support for the RLTP strategy, and as such, we felt that the weightings given in scenario 1 were well reflective of the support that we received throughout the process. There is strong consistency with the government policy statement on land transport and the declaration of a climate emergency, but nevertheless, the RLTP still retains a balance of activities, and later on in this presentation we'll actually show the balance of spending across different activity classes. So, we felt that the result that we put forward in scenario 1 achieved a good balance between those. The regional advisory group offices across the region are, supportive of the approach. There certainly has been no one who has, violently disagreed with the scenario 1 as we've put forward. I'm sure everyone does have their views on whether the list is exactly what they would choose, but the point is we're trying to get to a consensus and move forward into the implementation of the RLTP, recognising that we will have differences of views about priorities around individual projects. And importantly, there was also strong support from Waka Kotahi for the consultation draft in terms of its proposed investment strategy and the emphasis on supporting the government policy statement on land transport. If we had felt that Waka Kotahi were less than supportive, that would have meant a more compelling case for actually changing the priority weightings. And fundamentally, we do believe that the priority weightings and the programme do support key initiatives such as UFD and the TSP in the Eastern Bay, and also supporting some of the priority activities in Rotorua and the Eastern Bay. So colleagues in those 2 areas, I think, were recognising that scenario 1 was generally somewhat better for their projects. And I think it is important that we remember this is a regional plan, and it is important that colleagues across the region feel they have a fair crack at the whip. So we felt, again, there was a good balance between the different sub-regions in this process. And fundamentally, the last point is that there's any change to a scenario does have an impact on project sequencing and interdependencies. And what we found was that several of the scenarios moved projects about quite significantly, and those projects were actually dependent or needed to be integrated with other projects, and that risked upsetting the whole balance of the programme. It is important as well to remember that the Waka Kotahi will also undertake their own assessment of sequencing and interdependencies for the National Land Transport Programme. So it's really important that at a regional level we have that convincing story about what needs to happen when. So I certainly appreciate that not every member of the committee will be happy that we have gone for scenario 1. But nevertheless, we felt at the deliberation subcommittee there was a really robust debate. There was lots of questions around not only the process, but how the programmes were put together. And I think we were convinced that following that process, we had in place something that we can feel proud to actually set forward as our investment strategy. So happy to take any questions before we move on.
Councillor Lees.
I could just make one specific comment with regard to the submission to have to go back to the very early objective weightings, which was 35% for freight and regional resilience and 15% for better travel options, which was, I think, the submission that was brought forward by Mayor Weber. One of the issues for me as a panel member was that one of our responsibilities is to ensure that the ROTP is consistent with the GPS and its priorities.
Yeah.
And with better travel options only being provided a 15% weighting, that wasn't particularly consistent with the GPS, which was supported by the RAG in their recommendation. The other issue was we did look at an option, because once that was accepted, the issue was, should freight have a greater weighting, and how could that be reflected? And that was why there was a scenario 4. So that was initially put forward for serious consideration, but then when we asked what the implications of that scenario was for the overall program, we found it did push projects out of sequence, and it meant that some projects were highly prioritised, but the project that needed to happen first, and which it was dependent on, was pushed down the list and may miss out on funding. So that sequencing issue, while it wasn't obvious until we actually dived into the detail of what the projects actually, how they fell with that shift, it became evident that that was why the RAG had made the recommendation that they had, and that we would be unwise to move from that.
Commissioner Selwood, then His Worship Mayor Weber. Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you. If I could just ask James to go back to the previous slide, because I just wanted to make some comments on some of those points and perhaps provide some more perspective as to why the discussion was robust at the deliberations meeting for the benefit of those members that weren't present. And I think it was very clear in representing the Western Bay view on the deliberations committee, including that of Western Bay of Plenty District Council and TCC. Both councils had submitted concern about the weighting, and in particular the inadequate weighting in our view of the freight and resilience component, which weighted at only 10% was a significant factor due to the significance of the state highway network, and in particular the dependence of all of our sub-regions on small business, the economy, and the link and connectivity through to the port. And given the significance of that, I think drove our concern as to district councils as to the respective weightings that were being used. It is true to say that evidence from the submissions were in broad support of the strategy, but I would argue that that was more in broad support of the 5 objectives that James led us through earlier, which included the balance of economic prosperity and access and mobility alongside sustainability and better transport options, as well as safety. So the overall objectives of the strategy are much broader indeed than the 4 GPS criteria. In terms of and I think for that reason, therefore submitters would be in broad support, and that was certainly true of all of the submissions that we read. In view of the strong consistency with the GPS, actually this is the one that concerns me the most, because the GPS is very clear that it wants to push the agenda on all 4 criteria. And if anything, the weightings within the GPS, or there are no weightings within the GPS, and one must infer from that that actually the government wants to see significant progress on all 4 criteria, and that freight and resilience is no less important to the government than is climate change. And so that is why actually I sought in the discussion to advance a 25% equal weighting, because I thought that was the most obvious way to achieve consistency with the GPS. It was clear, however, in the discussions that I would not get support for that, and so reverted to the option 4, and you will note in the papers that were sent out, moved that option 4 be the preferred option, which at least gave some concession to increasing freight and resilience in the weightings. However, I was unsuccessful at convincing my colleagues of that, notwithstanding some good discussion, and the motion failed. I think what it has left me with is concern that we are acting inconsistently with the GPS in terms of the weightings, and inconsistently with the needs of the region in terms of the importance of freight resilience, business, economy, as being a critical factor of our transportation system. And it is not receiving adequate weighting in our considerations. So those were the reasons why I took the position that I did. You'll note that I voted against the final resolution. And I thought it was important that other members were aware of that discussion and the representations that were made on behalf of Western Bay Plenty District Council, as well as TCC. Thanks.
His Worship Mayor Webber.
When I read this, I was reminded of the quote, "Am I on earth, in heaven or in hell, sleeping or waking, mad or well advised," which is a quote from A Comedy of Errors, which I think this paper might have been plagiarised from. But the reason we raised it as Western Bay, I think for the fourth long-term plan in a row, is NZTA have a process. The reason I asked to get it from what happened to the NZR, it was made very clear to me from the government. The minister's words were resilience, safety, enabling housing, and climate change. So why we come and create this, the point I was trying to make right in the beginning is NZTA have a set of rules. They're going to take all of these projects now and run them through their own concrete mixer and come out with a totally different answer than what we've done. Why have we put all the executive time into this Michael Mouse approach instead of going there? Where we tried to come from, and that if you look at climate change, reducing transport times by 10% will cut your emissions by 10%. The biggest use that we need to understand is we put in our submission, we are not an urban region. We are a rural and provincial region. We have got a whole lot of stuff that you're not going to achieve public transport. We need to face up to that. So what we've put in here, Western Bay will not be able to support. I'm sorry. I just think it's a bugger's muddle, as does our council.
Any further speakers? Questions? Points of clarification? Keep going, James.
Okay, so this next part summarises some of the key messages from the submissions process and recommendations for changes to the document that we have followed through on. So I think the important thing to note here is that this cannot hope to be a comprehensive summary of every single submission, but it does try to provide some key summaries around the various themes. So if we start with the healthy and safe people theme. So the key messages from the submissions process was that really all organisations, irrespective of their responsibilities, need to be aligned with the Vision Zero approach, where it's not acceptable for people to be killed and seriously injured on our roads. And further to that, there was a general acknowledgement that the RLTP represented a positive shift towards active transport, walking and cycling in particular. And there was a desire for safe cycle routes for children, particularly to and from school. So in terms of the recommendations that we made through the deliberations process, safety matters ultimately are relevant road controlling authority issues. But as we'll see later on when we discuss speed management, there are going to be some moves towards making that a more regional approach. Various improvement activities, can be included through low-cost, low-risk programs. A lot of the submissions we receive are in relation to specific locations, and so those can be treated through that process. And speed management now is included as a specific line item in the programme, and that reflects the proposed approach to the regional speed management plans that will be the subject of a paper a little later on in this meeting. So those were the key messages and the recommendations that were made to change the document or to take action to address the points that were raised. So the next theme is environmental sustainability.
James, just pause for a moment. Is worship being with us?
I think it would be helpful, going back to that slide, the guest editorial in this month's local government: if our roads aren't safe, then fix them. And reducing speed is not the solution. And you need to be aware that our council does not support this. We have submitted against speed reductions to overcome the issues of, the most dangerous road in New Zealand. Reducing the speed to 80 k's is not going to fix the problem. Since over the last year, if you look at the accidents, since we've reduced the speed, there's been very little change. So if having that objective is not, I didn't think we reached consensus on that either.
Keep going, James.
So the next key theme is around environmental sustainability. So the key messages here was, generally speaking, the environmental narrative in the document was balanced and positive. But having said that, there were some people who wanted less emphasis on climate change and some who wanted more. So hopefully, somewhere in between, we got the balance broadly right. But there are some recommendations that we made to improve the document. So the first of those was strengthening the narrative around the future provision of electric vehicles, whether those are private vehicles or public transport services. Identifying further opportunities to reduce emissions from freight vehicles, and also, as I mentioned earlier, the need to look at the greenhouse gas emission reduction targets in the light of the obligations under the Paris Declaration. So those were the main changes under that theme of environmental sustainability. So the next key theme is in...
Sorry, James.
Sorry, through the chair, Mayor Webber has a...
I'm sorry. Try to organise your afternoon tea. I'm multitasking here. Very critical issue, Your Worship. Your Worship, go for it.
Strengthening the narrative around electric vehicles. I suggest we take a lead from Auckland City. That is a New Zealand central government issue. There's nothing we can do about this at all. I don't think local government's going to start subsidising the price of electric vehicles to get the public to switch. And I go back to reviewing greenhouse gases. The biggest disappointment I've got of the whole thing, there is no mention about shifting to the Kawerau inland port as a high priority for us. We've been on the boat for so long, doesn't even mention coming out of the way we've done these calculations. And I just get, as I said, if you reduce travel times, if you take all of these class or safety rated 1 and 2 cars off the road, you'll fix a lot of things, but that's beyond our control.
I speak to Crow or David. There was another one over this side. Do you have a question? Any other questions or comments? Keep going, James.
So the next theme is inclusive access, and here there were key message around a strong emphasis on the access challenges in rural and coastal areas, and that more non-car access options are needed where those are feasible. So in terms of the recommendations, there is certainly a case for saying we can strengthen the narrative around the challenges of rural accessibility in the Bay of Plenty region, identifying the need to trial new public transport solutions such as on demand, and also a commitment to iwi engagement around transport aspirations and needs in communities to better understand what isolation actually means and how that can be best tackled. So the next key theme is economic prosperity. The key messages here, encouragingly, the submissions that we received from business and industry were very, very supportive of a low carbon economy. Businesses see great opportunities in that space. And there was also a call for a greater emphasis on freight issues, as we've discussed, well-connected multimodal hubs and access to ports. So in terms of recommendations, setting out evidence of the economic benefits of climate change action, stronger emphasis on the priority freight movement corridors. And this is an important point in terms of the GPS and the role in particular of providing better travel choices for personal transport mode shifts, in providing more space on the existing network for freight. So within the GPS, we have objectives both around the freight economic prosperity and also better travel options. And the two are not necessarily mutually exclusive. And in fact, our argument is that tackling single occupancy private car travel will free up priority for freight movements in particular. Finally, in this section, linking transport investment to job creation in these sustainable industries. So, for example, moving to decarbonise the bus fleet will create jobs in terms of manufacturing buses and also servicing them and the supporting charging infrastructure.
James, just pause for one moment. We've got a number of speakers here. Her Worship, then Commissioner Selwood, then His Worship Leah Webber. Her Worship.
Thank you. I would have hoped in the recommendations here we would have seen, but it may not have come out strongly enough in the submissions, a modal shift to a rail freight plan. And I don't see that mentioned at all.
James.
Through the chair, the challenge with rail generally is that the responsibility for investment lies squarely with Kiwi Rail. And whilst this committee and the councils can lobby for improvements to the rail network, we're not responsible for delivering them. It is, I think, a source of frustration that we haven't had greater engagement with Kiwi Rail around their rail network investment programme. And for the next RLTP, I think that integration needs to be much better. So I would agree with that point, but would make the plea that the RLTP, unfortunately, cannot at the moment in the current policy framework heavily influence or solve that issue. But that's not to say we shouldn't have a better opportunity to do so in the future.
And Your Worship, we've hired ourselves out writing invitations to Kiwi Rail to join us at this table. In fact, all the mayors and yourself included, all keen to the Minister, to Minister Wood, to get them to move and shove and come to the table. So it's not for long.
I agree, and I'm aware of that action, but I do think that we do have a role in influencing policy going forward. And just like the previous recommendation that was challenged about what can we do about EV vehicles, we certainly can influence that. We strongly support consideration at a central government level for a modal shift to a rail freight plan. And otherwise, what are we? We're not just setting priorities, we're also a regional advocacy group on transport and integrated transport. So I would have loved to have seen that in there, that's all. We'll keep lobbying.
Commissioner Selwood, then His Worship the Mayor.
Thank you, Chairman. I recall raising in the deliberations the omission of, under the freight recommendation, if you can go back, in the freight recommendation, strong emphasis on priority freight. Also, we have to recognise commercial trips. And this is often omitted in the conversation around freight as supposedly representing commercial and business trips. But I think there is a need to make sure that we're clear with our wording, because otherwise people will infer from that we're just talking heavy trucks.
Yeah.
So I think the strong emphasis on business and commercial trips and freight movement corridor should be the appropriate wording.
His Worship.
Yeah, just echo that. And we asked for this information to be included. I've seen a report from the Port of Tauranga in the shift to rail that they've done over the last 20 years in terms of emissions. It's in thousands of tonnes we've saved. So we got to put that evidence up to support where we're coming from. But if we stopped all of those logging trucks that drive past Kinleith and Batarru, Kaura, Murupara, where there are railheads, there is a significant opportunity for us to do more. And that going in there, and with all due respect, it's going to create jobs by going to electric buses? Really? What's the evidence of the number of jobs that are going to be created that's going to do that? I think we've got to be very careful that we get past the emotive and into hard evidence.
Sorry, Glenn, sorry, I can't see you from the screen, you're hiding. Okay, sorry, my apologies.
Just on the topic of rail freight, the Climate Change Commission report today has now seemingly changed the wording and timeframes for the electrification of Hamilton to Tauranga Rail. So it's now just described as further reductions could be achieved with no set time. Previously in the draft report was 2025 that they recommended that, so that's been sort of pulled back. So coupled with the Kawarau issue that was raised and coupled with the overall, I suppose, lack of clarity around what the committee's putting forward, I suggest that's probably a key aspect of the climate change discussion, which ties into your earlier comment, James.
Keep going, James. Afternoon tea is about 2 minutes away.
Okay, so the next theme is resilience and security. So the key message here was that people were supportive of the overall strategy set out in the RLTP, but there were some who wanted more investment, whereas others were concerned by the cost. And the key challenge with resilience is that you are investing in something that quite often you hope you actually never need. So you don't necessarily see an immediate benefit from the investment, but you might see it 20 years down the line when there is a weather event or something that actually then shows that investment was worthwhile. So it's always a key challenge with that message about the benefits of resilience and security. In terms of recommendations, strengthening the strategic case to support network resilience at the right cost, so making that point that we do need to invest in things that people might not see, but actually will provide benefits in the event of a severe challenge to network resilience. Identifying and emphasising the importance of multimodal alternative routes, which I recall was a very detailed discussion of one of our previous meetings, and also making a stronger link with the climate change issues. So those were the recommendations that we've put forward for inclusion in the document. So at that point, is it worth breaking for afternoon tea? So I'm conscious that we've had a lot of discussion.
How long before we get to the recommendations?
So we've got 2 more parts, but these are quite short.
Okay. His Worship there, Weber.
Earlier comment about the problem with Ashburton and network resilience. We have 2 of those ourselves. Lose the bridge over the Uratara stream, lose the bridge over the Tapuna stream. What are the options? We don't have them. They are really bridges. You know, we talk about these other things. You know, they actually don't seem to be very high on the priority list. But a couple of bus stops in some areas, which might get from 3 people in a bus to 4 people in a bus. You know, where's the payoff in these things?
James?
So this next section essentially summarises what the RLTP is proposing by way of the investment strategy. So I think it is important to recognise that Waka Kotahi have an intervention hierarchy, which means that before new infrastructure is considered, there has to be a rigorous process of working through alternative options, whether that's integrated planning, demand management, and making best use of the existing system. With the best will in the world, we've seen the affordability challenges we've already had on infrastructure projects. So that investment hierarchy essentially reflects the realities of life that we face when we're trying to understand where to put our investment. In terms of strategic interventions, the RLTP comes up with 9 in total. I'm not going to go through these in any great detail, but the important point to make here is that a lot of these strategic interventions are integrated with other strategic interventions. So a very good case in point is asset management and maintenance, which is something that actually represents a significant proportion of the RLTP investment. And that's not only good for the purpose of resilience, but also for things like safety, walking and cycling, being able to walk and cycle on a surface that actually is true and not full of potholes. That's actually something that's really important to people on a daily basis. So understanding all of these strategic interventions and how they fit together is really crucial for the RLTP as a whole. In terms of investment by activity class, so essentially this slide sets out the summary by different activity classes. Now, again, to make the point, this is what the RLTP is proposing. This is not what Waka Kotahi will necessarily fund. And we've also already heard from David about the challenges of the NLTF at the moment. So in essence, it shows that the highest level of funding for any activity class is around local road maintenance. That's keeping our existing assets fit for purpose. So overall, that's over $800 million across the next 6 years. Local road improvements and the state highway maintenance also make up a significant amount of total funding. So if you add up all of that, those bottom 3 activity classes on that slide, that comes to nearly $2 billion. And overall, over the 6 years, the proposed total investment in the RLTP is $3 billion, made up of those activity classes that you see there. So just to be clear, the blue is for the year 2021-22, the first year of the NLTP, and the orange is the 6-year total. So once again, the emphasis here is very much on trying to make better use of the existing network, ensure there is good asset management and resilience, and also starting to work towards improvements in the future transport system. So, the transport system plan in the Western Bay has a very significant program of projects, but a lot of those, in terms of actually building stuff on the ground, are pushed out in a few years' time. The emphasis at the moment is on getting the business cases completed so that when funding is available, we're actually ready to go.
James, just pause, please.
Just a quick question with regard to public transport services. Given what the TSP is all about, which is increasing modal shift away from single-use vehicles and including a big shift to PT, I'm not sure why the funding doesn't sort of increase quite significantly from the base figure for this coming year. When you tally it up, it looks like a very level line across there, and it just doesn't, it never has made sense. I'm just wondering if I'm missing something. I can see the increase in infrastructure investment. I can see the increase in walking and cycling, but it just looks like business as usual for PT services.
Well, I think what we've got to remember is that first and foremost, we already provide some quite frequent buses, particularly in Tauranga and the Western Bay, and we actually struggle to attract patronage to those services. So, the clear direction we've had through our Public Transport Committee is first and foremost, we have to make better use of the existing investment before we consider adding more and more services and frequencies into the network. Fundamentally, we also need that infrastructure to ensure that our services are fast and reliable. If we simply put more buses into the existing system, they'll just get caught up in congestion, just like the buses at the moment. So we've taken a relatively conservative approach, but we have also, through our long-term plan, made a provision to implement the UFD medium scenario, which does envisage increases in services if that priority infrastructure is put in, and also if there is an integrated approach to demand management. Because at the end of the day, if people have free car parking, they will use it, and just putting more bus services on will not actually solve the problem.
Quick, then I need to go to his worship.
Quick, does that mean that you or your Public Transport Committee has now decided not to change from the hub and spoke model, which your predecessor sort of described as being a reason for that was to reduce the costs, and that it wouldn't require increased funding to move away from a hub and spoke, which is being talked about by Tauranga City Council as probably a desirable thing to see happen?
At this stage, no decision has been made by the Public Transport Committee about the future model, but it is something that we will be reviewing over the next few months to understand whether hub and spoke is still the most appropriate model, and what that would actually mean for both service costs and also attractiveness to the passenger. So no firm decisions have been made. We have to recognise that Tauranga and the Western Bay is a polycentric urban form. We're not going to change that. So providing direct services from one point to potentially 10 other points is very resource hungry, and that interchange, efficient interchange, is almost certainly going to be necessary for some journeys. The question is, which journeys does it make most sense to be direct, and which ones requiring a transfer? And that's what we've got to work out.
Worship, Mayor Weber.
Yes, I suppose if you look at one of the significant roles we have in this committee is monitor the implementation of the Regional Land Transport Plan. When I hear more business cases required, we have done business cases on public transport services in this area to death. Have we failed badly? Are they that wrong that we need to do another one? I know the number of business cases that be done on the Imakarawa Road. We could have built it down there for how much we spend on executive time. What are we going to do to monitor this plan to say, actually, this stuff's going to happen? Or we're going to come, or our people that come back in 20 years' time saying, we'll do another business case. I'm getting a bit impatient. 20 years is a long time.
Point made.
Yeah, but the point made's fine. When are we going to do something?
Well, through the chair, I think we have to recognise that if we want funding from Waka Kotahi, they require a business case, and that is just the way it works.
It's the system.
Sorry. It also takes investment by the individual authorities to front up with their components. And that has not happened. So if they won't front, you can't expect the other party to turn up.
Great. James, keep going.
So in terms of some of the key investments, I've summarised a table here from the RLTP, which sets out the low cost, low risk programme for the next 3 years across the different approved organisations in the region. So recognising the funding constraints that we
have already talked about, and also recognising the point made about business cases. It is important to emphasise that the low cost, low risk programs do represent an opportunity for local communities to see some improvements, which, whilst they might not be particularly large in scope, will actually benefit people on the ground in terms of how they go about their daily business. So I think a key message from this RLTP is that, you know, low cost, low risk in a very funding challenged environment is an opportunity to actually go out and get some stuff done and demonstrate that we can actually deliver. This slide just summarises some of the region-wide investments that are being proposed. It was actually taken from the consultation draft and will need to be reviewed and updated in the light of the completion of the document. But essentially it sets out a balanced story across the region around the different proposals that are coming through the RLTP. So really, I only have one more slide, which is about the next steps, and then it's afternoon tea.
There's worship there, but
If we can go back to that previous slide.
Yeah.
One of the significant things is about the design and consenting of the preferred Toter Street multimodal improvements. You know, that's been around 20 years as well. And we're going to spend another $4 million on, this is going to cost $500 million at least to do. Where is that planned in the long-term plan? So we're just going to talk about it and not do it.
Well, through the chair, I mean, that's not a question I can answer. That would be for the City Council.
No. Well, you know, there is absolutely no reason to spend $4 million if there is no funding line anywhere in the project to do it in the 10 years. That is illogical. So if you're not going to fund it for the next 10 years, don't do the investigation. Then say $4 million.
Commissioner Selwood, are you biting at the bit there, or?
No, this is New Zealand Transport.
Okay,
This
right.
is the big project. Same as you've got up there Hewlett's Road, 1 million to 100 to fix Hewlett's Road. If you haven't got the funding in there in the 10 years, why do the investigation? No, it's not logical.
Keep going, James.
So, Chairman, sorry,
I'm
before.
sorry, Commissioner Selwood. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Just before you do move on, I mean, I share Mayor Webber's frustration at the volume of and constant churn of business cases and the enormous amount of money we are spending on them. And but they are nevertheless important. If they're not done, you'll never get a project up to the start line for construction. So I think what it does to me is underline the need for better efficiency in delivery of business case processes, because there is a constant churn of criteria and evaluation, and the cost of doing these is just getting astronomical. To think that many of our projects and the priorities are just business cases and not implementation is a clear indication of that.
Sorry, the point I'm trying to make, there's been enough interchanges. We built one at the other end of Hewlett's Road not too long ago. In New Zealand, we have built over bridges, and Commissioner Selwood, you know better than most of us, the capital cost of these is pretty easy. If it costs $500 million to do it in the South Island, it'll most probably cost you $500 million. I'm suggesting in year 3 of the long-term plan, there should be a provisional sum in there, best guess estimate of $500 million to do the work. Because if you haven't got the capital component in there, we've got to wait another 3 years. You know, do the business case, but put your best cost estimate in there for the project.
I wouldn't disagree.
James?
So
I've got my hand up. Sorry.
Mayor Chadwick, go for it.
Yes, look, I just would suggest, I can hear the frustration, but we were the beneficiaries of getting some shovel-ready money because we had a business case. And so the Nongataha roundabout wouldn't have happened unless we had that business case prepared. So I know it drives you crazy, But I do think no one knows what's going to happen to the economy, and no one knows when there's going to, and maybe a further dollop of investment. So you have to be ready for it. So I'd just go ahead and get them ready. That's my view.
So we're about to land on the recommendations.
Yeah, so this final slide is just some next steps, just to finish things off, and then we're into the recommendations in the paper. So we're here today to consider and hopefully endorse the RLTP, and then the document will go up to Regional Council for adoption on the 24th of June. And critically, submission of the document to Waka Kotahi has to take place by the 30th of June. That is an immovable deadline. Publication of the National Land Transport Plan from Waka Kotahi will take place in August. So at that point, we will have an idea of what funding we have received for the various proposed investments. And critically, the plan is to undertake a lessons learned review amongst officers in July and August time, and I'm certainly pretty keen to share the results of that lessons learned review with the committee at a future meeting. I think that'll be a really good opportunity to understand how we can do things better in the future.
What's it, James? Councillor Neave.
Just one issue that I think we need to address, even if we do accept the recommendations of the hearings panel, is how we're going to deal with the table that shows that the TNL stage 2 is funded. I think we need to correct the plan that we sign off for that. I think we've had some discussion about options for that, and one option is to move it from that table, which shows that it's funded, to treat it like Katikati bypass and put it at the bottom of the plan, noting that it could still be prioritised. Could you comment on that, James?
Yeah, through the chair, I think that is the most appropriate course of action at the moment. The challenge we have with any document such as an RLTP is that it becomes very quickly out of date, because things move on and assumptions you may have made about what was going to be funded or not change very quickly, as we've just seen. So I think for me, the challenge we have is that whatever we adopt now, we are going to be in a position to review and improve and develop on an ongoing basis. And we have to reflect that as best we can now in the document, as you've described, and then we move forward to actually getting on with the delivery.
So, Mr. Chair, just following on from that, I think we should have, if we do that, I think we need a footnote to explain why that has actually happened, and whatever commentary we add to that footnote, I think needs to be guided by this committee.
We can build that into another recommendation.
And I have got a recommendation that
we'll come to that. Sorry, I know. I've just got near with it. No, I'm not cutting you off. Near with it.
I recall making the statement at the very early stages, all of these projects that are supposedly approved, like the TNL, stage 1, stage 2, and the should be up the front. Because this is not the first time. Well, what we heard from the Minister on Wednesday is the same message we heard when Labor came in. It's about to go up for tender, but no, it's not. 3 years before, it was, it's in the fund, but sorry, we can't do it. We need to come up front, because this is causing incredible angst, and our ability to stay in this coalition of the regional is getting pretty hard to hold on to. Because why do we waste so much time developing these things? To me, it should go up the front. These are the projects that are approved and have been cancelled. When are they going to be reinstated? It's like we were saying before, as me and Chadwick said, we're here to advocate for these things. And I don't have much confidence leaving it in the hands of the regional council, sorry.
Sorry, Mr. White. Okay, James, we're ready to put the recommendations up. Amanda? Now there's 5 recommendations, and I'll refer you to page 30 of the hard copy. A number of you have indicated to me offline that you believe we need to reflect the committee's heightened frustration and, dare I say, anger around the announcement on Friday by the Minister with regards to the TNL. And Councillor Lees, you've also given notice of a number 7 notation. So.
Oh, well, just if we wanted to advocate with regard to TNL and perhaps the Omokoro interchange, an option would be a recommendation along these lines: send a letter to the Minister of Transport noting the importance of TNL Stage 2 and in particular the Omokoro intersection to the improvement of safety performance on State Highway 2 and requesting consideration of solutions and funding as soon as possible. Now, whether or not, David, you think that's a reasonable recommendation or not that the committee could pass, I don't know, but I'm taking it as something that I'd be happy to move if there's support for it.
Mayor Weber, would you be happy to support that, or would you like it beefed up?
With a significant change.
Yes.
The Omokoro interchange first. That's the most critical thing. I hear all these things going, but Western Bay has been saying for several years, the Omokoro interchange, we're building 1,000 houses in there, and it's a rural road bumping into a state highway. That is the first thing that has to happen with urgency.
Yeah, can you just turn it upside down, Councillor Lees?
Well,
Or Amanda?
yeah, I need to do that.
And that it is seriously considered in the National Land Transport Fund prioritisation.
We're going to express this how you wish to deal with it.
I think David's got some words as well.
I think Councillor Lees' words with your alteration around Omokoro are about bang on.
So just swap the order around.
Omokoro first.
Okay.
And give it, well, when you're ready to, it's a bit of the end.
So. You happy with the
And request.
you happy with the thrust of that, your worship?
Yeah, just let me go on here.
Oh yeah, there's also Councillor Lees' the notation coming up, and it's going to be 7 as part of the recommendation.
Be given in the upcoming NLTF funding considerations. We would like to have an answer to this by August.
Suggesting NLTF funding.
Yes.
Agrees to write to the Minister of Transport requesting a response by the, what do you want a date?
August is sometime. Later, September, I don't know.
I would think probably
We're October. Okay, what I suggest is, then just we won't address that right now, but in terms of getting it up here, it's been moved by Councillor Lees, seconded by His Worship Mayor Weber. We all know who's voting. I don't need to read it all out again. Some of you are, some of you aren't. I'll put that extra 6 as a recommendation. All those in favour, please say aye.
Sorry, hold on. Are we approving 1 to 6?
No. I'm just getting this up on here as number 6, Your Worship. Okay, all those in favour, please say aye. Against carried. And the notation, Councillor Lees, you wanted some extra words put in as a number 7.
Sorry, that Lees, Weber and carried is against recommendation 6.
Which is now number 1.
Well, you wanted to push to the top, Your Worship. So these are the words that you want to clarify.
whether or not it is, can be considered under recommendation 5, where the general manager's strategy and science makes minor numerical, editorial, presentational amendments prior to publication, including correction of the plan for the status of TNL stage 2, perhaps.
Does that give you enough clear direction?
Yes.
You happy with that? Okay.
So perhaps through the chair, just to clarify your understanding of what that correction involves. So that will be to shift where it currently sits within the table to the top of that list. Is that top of the list?
Right, well, it actually goes to, into the,
List of,
what we want to do is move it from the list of items funded outside of the NLTF to moving it onto the prioritised list in the same way as, and deal with it in the same way as we've done here to get bypass.
Everyone happy with that? Okay, well, the committee clerks asked for a bit of time to get some clearer wording, so you know the direction and the sentiments expressed, so we'll park all of that. We'll have afternoon tea, and then we'll come back, and your worship, what I'm going to do is, I know you've signalled your displeasure with a number of these recommendations. I'm going to take them in part, okay, so you can record your vote against if you so wish. Okay, the meeting's adjourned now until 3:20. All those on Zoom.
Could I just signal through you, Mr. Chair?
Okay, we're recording again, and if I can take you back to page 30 in the hard copy, and it will also be up on the screen. Item 1, which we have moved up to the top, it was played around with a little bit with a contribution from David. So what I'd like to do with Councillor Nees and his worship is they can just cast their eye over it again, and if you're both happy, if you'd be so kind as to move and second it again. This is number 1, unless you'd like to make further amendments or changes.
Yep. Thank you.
Okay, it's been moved, Councillor Nees, seconded by Mayor Webber. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Against, carried. What I intend to do now is go through these.
Chair, can you just record that I abstained from that?
Certainly.
Thank you.
About career prospects, isn't it? Okay. Abstained. Okay, moving down to 2. I'll take this one in part. Receives the report endorsement of the 2021-2031 Regional Land Transport Plan. Everyone knows around the table who's able to vote and who can't vote. I will move that. Councillor Nees, you happy to second that? Seconded Councillor Nees. I will put it.
Sorry, look, what does that actually mean?
Oh, we've just basically received the report.
And we're endorsing its contents.
No, the name of the report. Don't worry, you're not going to be hung out to dry on this one, Your Worship.
Well, you're trying hard. We received the report full stop, isn't it?
It has to name the report.
It has to name the report that you're going to receive.
That's the title.
That's the title. It's been moved, it's seconded. You can vote against it, Your Worship, if you so wish. I will put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? You abstain? No. Happy for that one, okay. 3, notes the public consultation submissions received. If you keep moving this around, I'm going to. And the resulting proposed changes to the RLTP document. Councillor Nees, you happy to move?
Your Worship, you can explain to me what that means?
Well, you can vote against this too, if you weren't happy with what the hearing subcommittee brought down in terms of its deliberations.
So that's the next one, part 4.
Oh, beg your pardon, yeah, 3, notes the public.
Part 3 is we should just note the public consultation submissions received, full stop, shouldn't it?
Yep.
Happy with that? Notes the public consultation submissions received. Okay, delete the last part of that. Be moved, councillor Neves, seconded by His Worship.
Yes, certainly.
Seconded by His Worship. I'll put it. All those in favour say aye. Against carried. 4. I don't think I need to read that one out, but is there a mover and a seconder for supporting the recommendations? It's been moved by Deputy Mayor Isles, seconded Councillor Neves. Seconded Councillor Neves.
I would like to move an amendment
Okay.
that we revert to the original weightings as per the recommendation from this committee.
Does change it substantially, but
Yes, it does. Need to go over it and redo everything.
right, I will accept that. You've moved. Is there a seconder for what His Worship has proposed?
I'm sure it will lapse, but
But there's none. It's lapsed for want of a seconder, so we revert back to the original motion. Mrs. Tatton's getting very busy around the side of the room here. Okay, it reverts back to the original recommendation, which is there, moved by Isles, seconded Neves. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against carried.
no.
Okay, His
I'd
Worship.
like
Yeah, it will be, Your Worship. Yeah, whoever wished his vote be recorded against. No, he didn't abstain from voting, but he wanted his vote recorded against. Councillor Neves.
Just with us taking out the fact that we, the subcommittee made proposed changes to the RLP document, I think we still need to add that in somewhere, because we're endorsing the transport plan. We're endorsing the transport plan with the proposed changes made by the hearings panel. I just think for clarity, we need to have that in there somewhere.
It comes up under that 5, does it not? We'll just take a 1 minute adjournment.
As amended, as approved by the relatively subject. As amended.
All hands on deck. We could go again. Okay, we're dealing with recommendation 5, endorses the regional land transport plan as amended by the regional land transport subcommittee for submission to the regional council. Is there a mover?
Subcommittee or the committee?
It's the hearing subcommittee. I'll move. You happy to second, councillor Neves? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any speakers for or against? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Mayor Webber voted against the motion and wished the vote recorded. Finally, it's on the screen behind us, but essentially delegates to the General Manager Strategy and Science Authority to make minor numerical, editorial or presentational amendments prior to final publication, including the correction of the status of Tikatimu Northern Link Stage 2 and Table 16, significant expenditure on activities not funded from the NLTF and the RLTP and movement to development of the Bay of Plenty Transport Programme. So, Councillor Needs, you happy to move?
I'm sorry. You go back to the.
Hold on, just
Number one, originally, please just show me number one.
Okay, Park, Park number 6, go back to number 1, Amanda. Go for it, your worship.
Shouldn't it be the Amakara intersection and the Takatimu Northern Link Stage 2? Both of them. The last one only report reflects one.
Get it right.
Okay, David, can you clarify for me, as the Amakara intersection was part of the TNL stage 2, but
So
we
Amakara
split it out for that?
What I understood was His Worship wished to highlight the importance of doing the intersection first as a matter of priority, as opposed to separating the two out as two separate things in the round. Because, TNL2 does include the intersection, or as it stands at the moment.
So for this purpose, we don't need to split it out?
I would like it included in there so that it doesn't
Super
get
clear.
lost. It's the status of the Amakara interchange and Takatimu in Northern Link Stage 2.
You picked up on that? Oh, sorry, your worship, you're going to have to repeat it again along something else.
Just including correction of the status of the Amakara interchange and Takatimu. After that, it's fine. So after stage 2, take that Amakara.
Oh, that's just the name of the
Yeah.
project. So you want me to take that out?
Yes, thank you.
No, Musa.
Through the chair, can I just check and perhaps through staff and Waka Kotahi in relation to how that was entered into the list and the information that we have in relation to the naming conventions that we have to or not need to maintain. So can I just check with staff?
Through you, Chair, that's not a correction in terms of what's in the plan. So the activity, which we are shifting in the plan from table 16, which is the significant activities not funded from the NLTF, is Takatimu North Link Stage 2, Omakara to Tapuna. So mention of the interchange is going beyond, and it's dealing with an activity that we're not talking about in this correction. It may be included, but it's not this activity.
Given the minister's conversation, what do we do? Because he's talking about.
Mr. Chair, can I perhaps make an observation? I think in number 1, you will effectively dealt with the issue of highlighting the Amakara intersection. I think in number 6 is simply a request to the staff to create what is now a matter of an error. And so I think being very clear that the error needs correcting. But number 1 deals with your issue of highlighting the situation, the importance of Amakara. And as Worship points out, the intent of the minister that Waka Kotahi have a good look at what we might do there.
Are you happy with the wording here, or you are?
Well, I'll rest in David's hands, because he's the one we're going to shoot if it doesn't happen.
I don't think number 6 is just a correction to ensure that.
Yes,
we need to take the correct words the staff have given us.
Councillor Lees, you happy to move?
Yes.
Yeah, I'll second. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. If we can also just note that Her Worship Mayor of Rotorua had to leave to go to a tangihanga and wished it noted in the minutes that she supported all the recommendations. So that dealt with. Well done, thank you so much. We're on the home straight, pardon the expression. Page 42, everyone, the land transport rule setting of speed limits, 2021 consultation, Mamuta. James.
Chair, I'll hand over to James.
James.
Thank you very much. So this presentation is essentially aiming to set out the scope of the consultation.
James, can I just interrupt you there? Can I just test the feeling of the meeting? Do you want to take this as read, this document, or do you want a brief synopsis, or everyone's read it? Okay, it's been moved by His Worship, seconded by, that we take it as read. Okay, okay. So we're going to take it as read, James. So I will now put the recommendations that are on page 43. Your Worship.
Our council has significant concern, and I would have thought every other territorial authority would. We do this at territorial authority level. If it has to come up to the regional thing, it'll take forever. There's a process, and I think it's easy to just let our submission, just leave it to the territorial authorities to get on. They've got the roads, they know what the circumstances are. You don't need to collect us all together to put it all together into one document.
I think we've highlighted that confusion in the letter that we're going to let go today, or God willing. Correct, James?
Yeah, through the chair, I think the key issue for this committee is the extent to which it feels that this is an issue that is best dealt with at a regional level. So at the moment, that is the proposal that is set out in the Waka Kotahi consultation. So what we've tried to do through the draft letter to the Chief Executive of Waka Kotahi is to point out some concerns that we have around the process and the additional work that will be required, which shouldn't in itself be a reason not to do something, because that's valuable, but it is the way that the process is set out and the potential for duplication, for a lot of additional coordination work that could perhaps be better dealt with in another way. So I think we've got to make a decision about the extent to which we either agree with the consultation that the Regional Transport Committee is going to take this on. That's one option. The second option is to say, no, we don't want anything to do with it. We just push it back to Waka Kotahi and say, you're the best people to deal with that. So you work with the road controlling authorities to sort it all out. Or the third option is a good old compromise where we all get around the table and try and work out between us the most sensible approach to delivering this. Those are essentially the three options. So what we're asking for today is some guidance from the committee about which of those you feel is most appropriate, and then we can send the letter with any suitable amendments accordingly to reflect that position.
So, Your Worship, do you feel your concerns and frustrations are included in the letter going to the Chief Executive of Waka Kotahi?
We wanted it being very explicit. NZTA can come out with an overarching recommendation, and we think that's the One Network was where they were going. But the actual setting of speed needs to be done at the territorial authorities. It doesn't need any regional transport committee involvement at all, is where we were coming from. Slight change.
Yeah, through the chair. I mean, if that is the direction, then what we need to make sure is that in the response back to Waka Kotahi, whether that's through this committee or through the technical officers, through the RAC, that we make that point that fundamentally it is for the road controlling authorities to make that decision. And that will remain the case. The change is that there's that coordination role so that speed limits are consistent across the region. And that's the proposal that Waka Kotahi have used to justify this change in approach. But if we can say we can do that coordination role in another way, then we need to be clear about what that is.
Commissioner Selwood, then Councillor Needs. Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm actually quite supportive of the letter and the way it forms. I'm sorry I dropped out of the conversation momentarily with an internet problem, so I may have missed some of the matters raised by Mayor Webber, but to me, this just adds a layer of complexity that is unnecessary, and I just question what problem we're trying to solve here. Is there clear evidence of inconsistency in approach, and certainly collaboration and coordination across district?
I think you've frozen. Okay, I'll come back to you, Commissioner. Councillor Nees.
My concern is the additional cost that this is going to incur, trying to coordinate something across a region. And I think it might be cumbersome for the Regional Transport Committee to manage that. So I'm quite supportive of trying to get Whakakatai to look at different ways of getting coordination across district boundaries, as opposed to a Regional Transport Committee having to negotiate and get involved in that.
Yeah, through the chair, I think pretty much every regional transport committee would share those same concerns. Certainly those that I've talked to express it in exactly those terms. There is a lot of additional work, which would be fine if there was an obvious benefit associated with that work. But at the moment, it is not clear what that benefit is.
Commissioner, you froze on us when you were in full flight, so I'll come back to you. Anything else you wanted to add?
No, I mean, the key point I wanted to make is I'm not aware of what problem we're trying to solve here. This seems just another layer of complexity that is going to load up the regional council unnecessarily, and I can't see the merit of proceeding in the direction, so I'm quite happy with the letter and raising concerns.
It's worship.
Where I was coming from, and I think we're in agreement, is that we say leave it as it is. The state highways, NZTA do those anyhow. All the other roads are local roads, and if you look at those maintenance costs up there, some councils, for all sorts of reasons, have decided they're going to stick with that, and they might change the speed limits to fix the problem. Others might say, no, we'll fix the road. If you leave it to the territorial authorities or the road patrolling authorities to do that in their own patch, so that they set the speeds and get on with it. If you're going to take it up to, what you're trying to say here, I think, is leave it as it is. But I would have done a couple of paragraphs.
It's great to do that now, but the last paragraph, we also invite Nicole Rosie to attend our next Regional Transport Committee meeting to front up to the angry mob. So.
Yeah. But I'm just mindful of we're all putting a submission in as individuals, and where our council's coming from, we want to do this ourselves, not through a region. But if there's mixed messages going back to Wellington, we're not aligned.
So you're really happy with this letter? You want to add another couple of paragraphs?
No, I'd just say bugger off politely.
Someone said you've been told you're very happy. So. Okay, there's recommendations we need to deal with on 43. I'll take them all together. Is someone happy to move? Councillor Needs?
Yes.
Moved. David, you happy? Or you select again your organisation, so you might pay to say kosher on this one. Okay, Deputy Mayor Isles, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against carried. That's yes. Now we've got Inspector. You're on stage. Thank you for being here.
It's great meeting people.
Okay, thank you very much for the opportunity to present. I'm highly aware and cognizant of the time, so I'll try and skip through this as quickly as possible without missing salient points. What I just wanted to do was give you a bit of a boots on the ground update as to actually what's been happening year to date out on the network. Thank you. And I'll start out with just the national view in respect of the 145 people that have died on our roads this year. Here we go. Sorry, it says 137. The most up-to-date figure is 145 after Queen's birthday weekend. The Bay of Plenty district, which encompasses 4 disparate areas, Western Bay, Eastern Bay, Rotorua and Taupo. We're sitting on 21. Thankfully, no deaths over the Queen's birthday weekend, but the way we're heading, we're looking to track and equal our toll or our deaths in 2020, which was 41. So if you think about that as each person, an individual life and the harm that is associated with it ongoing, it's pretty sobering stuff. I'll go through a very quick breakdown just of the 3 areas that are represented here at this meeting. Oh, just as an aside, the 5th of May is wrong, it was the 14th of May, which was the last fatal crash which occurred in the Podiki. It's actually quite rare for us to go past a month without a fatal crash, so we're celebrating that. Just a breakdown by district, not a surprise, 12 of those deceased have been drivers of vehicles, 2 passengers, 5 motorcyclists. That's an emerging trend for us, a pedestrian and a cyclist for the total of 21. As I mentioned, we have 4 totally disparate areas in the Bay of Plenty Policing District. If we look at the location and causation for Western Bay of Plenty, it remains, and this is historically correct, historically true, rural and state highway 6 over urban 2, vehicle versus vehicle 7 and single vehicle 1. And the causation will be a theme right throughout this presentation: impairment, distraction, inattention, frustration, manner of driving. And you have lack of restraints, which will feature through this as well. Eastern Bay of Plenty comes with its own set of unique problems. Again, rural features quite strongly, rural/state highway. Single vehicle is up to vehicle versus vehicle 4. And if I can sort of stereotype, Eastern Bay of Plenty has a stereotypical rural single vehicle impaired driver not wearing a seatbelt as an historic theme, and that's a theme peculiar to the Eastern Bay of Plenty. Again, causation impairment is the absolute standout with 4. And when we're talking impairment, we're talking alcohol, illicit or prescription drugs, or fatigue. And again, in one of these cases, perhaps where a seatbelt was being worn, that may have saved that person's life. Finally, to Rotorua, I appreciate the media from Rotorua is not online. Again, rural is the theme. 2 vehicle versus vehicle, 2 single vehicle, and the causation there, distraction and impairment. And this is the one case this year where speed too great for the conditions features. And I think, again, a lack of restraint is another feature. So if we ask ourselves what's hurting us now and what's hurting us historically, I'll tell you that it is rural locations. I will tell you that it is impairment through alcohol, illicit drugs and fatigue, distraction and inattention, and it's that moment's lack of judgment or lack of concentration that decision or that action which is done in a split second, which has a lifetime's worth of consequences. Manner of driving also features and lack of restraints, as I've mentioned, particularly in single vehicle crashes where multiple people are involved and we find people are getting ejected from the vehicles. Disturbing trend for us is motorcycles, both in the manner, particularly in the summer months, the manner in which motorcycles are being ridden quite aggressively and at excessive speed, and also the lack of protective gear that people are choosing not to wear. $99 what we call skull caps, because they're trendy and they look like German helmets. no gloves, no jackets, sand shoes, that type of thing, and that's only going to end badly. So May, 7th and 8th of May and the 14th and 15th of May, we ran a midwinter operation. A large number of people came down into the Western Bay of Plenty to do basically impairment stops. And we chose the Bay of Plenty because unfortunately that features highly in previous operations in relation to impaired driving. So the figures are, excuse the pun, they're sobering. You've got out of 6,000, just under 6,500 breath tests, we prosecuted 85 persons for driving with excess breath alcohol. That equates to 1 in 75 vehicles. So if you think about it, you're sitting on the side of the road and you're counting vehicles, every 75th vehicle has an impaired driver who's incapable of proper control of their vehicle by virtue of what they've consumed. We ran the same thing again a week later. Just under 8,000 breath tests, and unfortunately the number went up, 94 prosecutions, 1 vehicle per 83. So in 4 days, we apprehended 180 persons for driving over the limit or driving impaired, which is a really sad indictment on the Western Bay of Plenty, but unfortunately our recent operations also tell us that it's happening in other parts of our district as well. A disturbing trend is inter-district travel, and there's been a couple of examples where we've stopped people who are either intending on or have come from places such as Kaitaia to Tauranga or Tauranga to Gisborne, and they've been impaired, and more concern is they've had family members and young children in their vehicles. I was asked just to touch briefly on speed management. I mean, clearly the New Zealand Police fully support the concept. I think if we're going to look at lessons learned, one of the keys for me is the district manager of road policing would be consultation. So we get a consistent voice across the Bay of Plenty and ensure that we get a consistent approach to this really important process. The consultation process to date has probably been ad hoc, and it's a very big beast, so I acknowledge that. But sometimes it feels like the New Zealand Police have been lumped in with the public. You have X amount of days to write a submission. For me, at the end of the day, we're the end user of this product, and we've got to get it right. And I can think of pockets of the network where we haven't got it right, and it's just been left to New Zealand Police to enforce. It's not that the roads aren't self-explaining, some of the speed limits are not realistic, and from my experience, I'm not sure that a truly in-depth evidence base has been used to come up with some of these speeds. And I do understand that in some cases it's a slow process, but they're looking at reviewing these to make sure that they are appropriate. And I do acknowledge that we are working with the odds and evens system. And to me, that doesn't have an evidence base in itself. And the reason I say that is in some situations we're dropping speed limits by 20 kilometres an hour, where roads have been engineered up. That doesn't self-explain. There has to be a reason for it. And when police stop a vehicle and say you are speeding, that the response from that member of the public should be, yes, you're right, I'm speeding, not, oh, I didn't realise. Because if we do this, all we're going to be doing in the New Zealand Police is diminishing our trust and confidence, public trust and confidence, and that's a key priority for the New Zealand Police, is to have the trust and confidence of all. Overlaying that again over roadworks, I guess for me I just need to know who to contact, because there are times when, again, the roadwork numbers don't make any sense, they're not self-explaining, they're not realistic, and particularly during the weekends where a 30 or 50 kilometre an hour speed limit may have been totally appropriate while the men were working. At the weekend you have some people slowing to 30 k's, other people not slowing to 30 k's. It causes frustration, we get calls for service in respect of that because of the behaviours of the people who are going through the roadworks at a speed which is above what is posted. So I guess it's, again, a consistent approach to what's realistic and what the road explains itself as, the self-explaining road. Just the last part about the speed, there is an expectation on New Zealand Police to have a percentage or to take cognizance of the 0 to 10 speed, which is any speed over the speed limit 0 to 10. I'm a little reticent to go down that track with my district, and the reason being is we're still trying to contain excessive speed. And when I say excessive speed, I'm talking 230 kilometres an hour on the tell, 170 in a 50, 195 in a 70. And these speeds aren't one-off. These are the speeds that we are realising every day of the week, predominantly on the state highways, but also in the urban environment as well. And to me, that is our target. These are the deliberate people that are out and without a doubt will endanger people's lives by their reckless, deliberate, excessive speed. So I do get the 0 to 10, and I do understand that there is a theory around we reduce the speed by 2 kilometres nationally, and it equates to X amount of deaths. I'll go out on a limb here, but I don't see that in the Bay of Plenty. I don't see how the police member on the ground equates that to somebody who's doing 135, 140 in between here and Taupo, and they're consistently speeding. So, and finally, I just, as I was preparing this, I got through the slide presentation, and I was just about to send it off, and I saw this in stuff which related to the tragic crash in Ashburton where 4 people were deceased. And it appears to me that the situation was, as Inspector Gaskin said, it was a moment's carelessness. What it appears is that somebody has failed to give way at an intersection. And I think we have to be really careful that we interrogate the investigation and the data, and we don't just lump everything into the speed bracket, because this was not speed. This was a situation where a moment's inattention at an intersection has caused 4 deaths. And I see that for the 6 years that I've been here, and about 85 to 90 fatality crashes that I've seen and attended, this is what I'm seeing. So there may be some disparity between what's happening on the road and that higher strategic level, whether it's through recording purposes, recording processes, or the system. I'm not sure, but I guess what I'm trying to give you is just a bit of a snapshot of what's happening out there at the moment. And if you'd said to me 3 years ago that impairment, and in particular alcohol, was a major factor in the majority of our deaths and serious injuries on the road, I would have found it hard to believe. But regrettably, it's a situation where we've set operations up. You lift rocks, you find things. I think that's pretty much it for me. Pretty down and dirty sort of report, but that's basically the year to date from the Bay of Plenty.
Deputy Mayor Riles.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Inspector Crowe. The 4 fatalities in the rural Eastern Bay, do you analyse those deaths as to whether they're unlicensed drivers, the state of their vehicles, whether they be like Star 2, etc.?
Yes, so every fatality and serious injury crash is attended by a highly trained serious crash analyst. The investigation is very thorough because we're either reporting for a prosecution purpose 30% of our work, which means that the offending driver has survived the crash, or 70% of our work, which is reporting to the coroner, which requires obviously a high standard of investigation. Just off the top of my head, I can tell you that all of the fatality crashes that have occurred in Eastern Bay, and in fact the Bay of Plenty, have all been single fatalities, which is in stark contrast to 2 years ago, where we had multiple fatalities. We had in one crash 8 dead, in one crash 5 dead, in 2 crashes 3 dead. So trying to analyse the trends is is something I've just about given up on doing because it's hard to find a pattern. But rest assured that we are examining everything. There's three things: the environment, the vehicle, and the driver. Those are the three major headings that we interrogate. And that's basically why I've got that information in the first 3 or 4 slides around location and causation.
Thank you. Commissioner Selwood.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Inspector. I thought that was an excellent presentation, and it provides a very valuable context in understanding the road safety risks across the region. I was interested in your particular comment around the speed environment not matching the set speed limit. And if there are areas of that, which I suspect there may be in our territorial area, Tauranga City Council would certainly be keen to hear about those. So please inform us, because I think those two have to go hand in hand to build confidence in both the correct speed and the enforcement of it.
Yeah, thank you. I think the way forward is consultation. As I mentioned, it's a little ad hoc. My understanding is that for consistency, everything has to now go through our national headquarters. But I think that local input is hugely important because if you've got a helicopter view from Wellington, it's difficult to know what is appropriate and what is not. And I think consultation will provide the consistency and will provide the evidence to make sure that we've set the speeds at an appropriate setting as opposed to too low or too high.
Thank you. I understand we have a Tauranga City Council speed review in train for later in the year, so the need for consultation is noted.
We need to move on. Glenn, putting you on the spot, anything you would briefly like to share with us? What's hot in your spot?
Just today's Climate Change Commission, if anyone's interested in that, the key takeouts for transport are reported as a reinforcement of the need for compact communities, plans to support greater funding of substantially increased funding they're suggesting from central government for active and public transport. A move to reduce PT fares is recommended, which is previously it was for children and community services card holders. Now they're suggesting reduced fares for everyone. A move to congestion charging, and the other thing was sort of more of a focus on rapid transit and frequent transport. So nothing surprising about that's kind of locked in the key findings that they had signalled.
Dan, anything at the port that you'd like to share with us?
Just in terms of the relevance for this group, a few things at the top of my mind, because we've just been preparing a submission for the TCC long-term plan, and it's shown that whilst we're continuing to get strong growth through the port, a large part of that is actually corresponding with increased growth on rail. There's a rail freight and also increased growth on transshipment. It's not necessarily directly correlating to increased truck movements on the road. So the discussions that were taking place earlier about mode shift, that's something that are very, very much at the forefront, and we're keen to see growth in that rail freight sector as well. And the port's continuing with its plans for its further extension, and we have lodged our application for a resource consent, which is progressing that. So, thank you. Any questions to any of the Councillor Needs?
Just, I see that there's a proposal for another freight study coming through. Will the Port of Tauranga be being proactive and trying to get their voice heard in this particular study?
I'm not sure. I see Commissioner Selwood laughing there. I think we're up to about number 24 in terms of the freight studies that have been commissioned. Sometimes we are approached, but a number of them we aren't. So, yeah, certainly if there's the opportunity to, we would be keen to make sure that the information is factual, obviously.
We're on the home straight. Deputy Mayor Arthur, did you get your question answered before? Would you like to update us on the Eastern Bay?
Just a couple of brief ones, Mr Chair. We're in the process of deliberations over our LTP submissions. Of note, or in relation to this committee, there's been quite a response from the public requesting us to do further work with regard to public transport, especially for our more isolated communities. Also, again, through the submission process, more pressure being put on us to make sure we don't lose sight of a second bridge, which again will be part of our spatial planning. And of the 429 submissions that we've received, there was 265 submissions received regarding seal extension, 70% in support of us re-engaging that process, which was discontinued back in 2009. So now faced looking at what option we will undertake. That's all. Thank you.
Councillor Nees.
Just very quickly, the Regional Council has made decisions on its long-term plan. So, as previously mentioned, there's work on optimisation of the network in the Western Bay, some substantial work on upgrading the Rotorua public transport network. We funded a study, $300,000 study on decarbonising buses. This is not to duplicate work being done by other regions, but to look at what may have to happen locally to enable that to happen. On the transport fares, just picking up on what Glenn was mentioning, we agreed to extend the pilot for free fares for children in the Western Bay to all times, and have extended the student trial that we've been running in the Western Bay to the Eastern Bay to see if we can get some increased uptake of the public transport network over there.
We've come to the end of the meeting, have we not? Oh, there's so many screens here. You're coming in on Cinerama, Commissioner. You'd like to say something? No, you mute stuff. Mayor Webber. Oh, ended on a high note for us, please.
Well, that's difficult.
I know. Try.
I think we need to note, and I mentioned it before, the amount of maintenance money that's being spent by the territorial authorities in our district. If you look at it, that's all on local roads. When you see some councils, and I've got a rough idea of the kilometres, spending 25 million and some spending 2, I would suggest that a lot of our local roads are going backwards. And that's something we really need to keep an eye on, because that is where most of the freight comes from. There's not many forests queued through orchards or dairy farms in Red Square at Darwin City, or in the Ealing precinct in Rotorua. So we've just got to be mindful that we're not really investing, in my opinion, in our local roads. The other point but the review of the process we've gone through, I presume there'll be a degree of independence in that. Thank you.
Councillor Thwaites, thank you for presenting in the public forum. I hope some of the resolutions have given you a little bit more comfort. So,
No.
You say no. All right. Your chief has said no. Thank you to all of you for your attendance and your contributions, but special thanks to you, Amanda, and Namuta, and Rachel, and James, and other staff that just contributed to today's meeting. Travel safely, everybody, and keep below the speed. Tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā tātou koutou. Kia ora.